Alright, Uku. If all my calculations are correct, all we need to do is gently place this slightly extremely volatile and explosive core into the machine. Alright. Gently. Gently. Alright. Nothing's blown up. Nobody's radioactive. I think we're good to go. Oh jeez, oh no, oh god, Uku, call the fire department, call the military, call the Air Force, call God, this is not going well! Okay, so perhaps my idea to turn YouTube comments into a renewable and reliable energy source may have been just a tad more volatile than I had originally calculated, but the fire department came in and only about half of the lab got exploded, and amazingly, nobody died or even got injured, so I'm counting this as an absolute win. And interestingly enough, it does relate to the topic of our video. See, a couple days ago, I was watching the new Spider-Man movie, and don't worry, I have no intention of spoiling anything beyond what the trailers have already shown you, but as you know from the trailers, Dr. Octopus does make an appearance in this new movie. And that got me thinking about the earlier Spider-Man trilogy, specifically Spider-Man 2, the one that Dr. Octopus was in. And if you're like most people, myself included, you would have assumed that, pretty much the entire movie was science fiction. I don't think anybody could blame you for thinking that. I mean, it's a superhero movie based off of a comic book. There's no reason to think that any of it wouldn't be science fiction. Well, as it turns out, a surprisingly large portion of that movie was not science fiction. And that got me thinking about movies in general, right? Most of the time we address the fact that a lot of people have misconceptions about the real world based on how the movies portray it. For example, one thing that's very common is that chloroform knocks you out instantly. It does not work like that. Or another one is that the Wild West was portrayed in a certain way that very much was not like that in actual history. I made a whole video about it a little while back. I'll leave the description down below. But that got me thinking that on the flip side of that coin, things that are real, to a certain degree, are portrayed in movies, and because they're portrayed in movies a certain way, we believe them to be complete science fiction. In this case, specifically, I'm referring to Dr. Octopus's energy machine. You know, when he's like the power of the sun in the palm of your hand. And that is something we're actually kind of able to do, believe it or not. And the way that Dr. Octopus does it isn't entirely inaccurate. I mean, no, there's not mechanical arms involved, although that would be very awesome. But he's not terribly off in the way he described the whole process. And because of that, I thought it'd be fun to make a couple videos going into this topic of things that we think are not real because of movies when they actually are real. Starting with Dr. Octopus's sunlight sunburn machine thing. Now, I don't know how much background you have in basic physics or astrology, mainly because I'm talking to a microphone and I have no idea who's watching this video. But basics is that because the sun is so big, it pushes a lot of its helium together, and then when it goes boom boom, it makes the energy and makes it so that we can rotate the sun around the sun, and the heat makes it to us and we don't die in a frozen ball of death. Now, needless to say, it's kind of impossible to make that much mass on Earth, right? We would need the equivalent mass of the sun, and that's like more than anything we have on Earth. It's physically not possible to make something with that much mass on Earth. So we needed to find another way to do it. Now, the way that Dr. Octopus describes doing it is actually pretty accurate as to how you would do it in real life. Like he says in the movie, you take the tritium and you essentially blast it with laser. This makes it super hot, super dense, it condenses, explodes, and creates the energy. Now, Like I said earlier, there's no actual mechanical arms involved, even though I think that would probably be the best way to do it, scientifically speaking, of course. And it's not like it's a really large ball of exploding gas that's kind of manipulated by these mechanical arms. It's kind of happening in like a containment unit, so it's a bit more stable. But I think the Spider-Man myth, it's just overall better for scientific reasons, of course. Not just because I want to see it happen in real life. Not at all, no. But the point is that this is actually a method that scientists are looking into as an actual reliable renewable energy source. And the way that Dr. Octopus describes everything happening is more or less how you would do it in real life. Now, the way he actually does it on screen, yeah, that part's not scientifically accurate, unfortunately. But the description is. And I think it's important, this one specifically, because generally speaking, we're all better off the more we understand where our energy comes from. When we're not so blissfully ignorant of where stuff comes from, we can encourage companies to steer toward better options for our power, which overall benefit ourselves and the environment we live in. Now, unfortunately, like in the movie, this is very much still in the experimental phase, and we're not entirely sure if we're going to be able to do it in a method that actually produces more energy than it takes to do the actual method. Because in this case, we're using a laser, and blasting the laser takes a lot of juice, and then you need the material, which isn't particularly easy to get, and it also involves helium, which I made a whole video on that a little while ago. And if you watch that video, you know we're kind of running out of that as well, which is an entirely separate problem. It's a different thing, and you can watch the video if you're interested in that. But the point is that it is potentially viable, and hopefully once it does become viable, if it becomes viable, then we can encourage people to move toward it. Now, a couple of the concerns is basically what you see in the movie, where, it expands and sucks everything in, and then people start freaking out, and glass, gets launched at the one and only person you love, and the control chip in the arms gets fried. That's the main concern of what the fusion reaction will do. But thankfully, that's the other part of the movie that isn't scientifically accurate. If the experiment fails, right, if we lose the ability to actually continue to, blast it and cause the fusion reaction, whatever we're using just kind of expands, cools off, and then it kind of all just shuts down. That's just how physics works. Now, the material that you use to be able to do it is a tad toxic, not gonna lie, but fortunately we don't have to use much of it, and in comparison to the amount that we have to use for nuclear energy, it's definitely better in terms of comparing how much of it we use and how much it could potentially harm the environment.